that note, our keynote speakers today, our Canadian educator friend, who we wanted to honor, Dean Shareski, who was, he had his camera up, or his phone up, and he was taking pictures of everybody, because I bet he's never been introduced like that in Texas before. And then some guy named Steve Dembo is going to just kind of help him with it. We thought this was a great idea to have a dueling keynote. These two guys are very entertaining. They're a lot of fun. They're more entertaining than Carl and I by a long shot. You're going to appreciate that. I find it odd that I'm standing at the back door and the Discovery people are asking if they can just step in because they say something about it going to be a train wreck, and they just want to watch it happen. These two guys work for Discovery. Dean actually left a school district where he was basically an instructional tech or instructional support with technology in Canada, Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. He's taught first grade. We had that in common, so he's been in the classroom and had that experience. His wife's still a teacher. So I'll let the two of them just go ahead and get started and entertain you for the next 60 minutes. And if not, we'll take care of that minute.
All right, that was strange and wonderful in so many ways.
Let's get you logged in first.
Well, like I always say to people, that Scott says entertain you for an hour. Right? Keep your expectations really low, and that way you won't get disappointed. So that's about all I'll be able to promise you. So let me just give it a second. All right, that didn't take too long. Well, thank you so much again. That was actually Steve. This happens to him all the time. He actually did a keynote in Canada a couple months ago. And I didn't see it, but the rumor was he got a standing ovation. I've never got a standing ovation, but I'm counting that one. So that's, I'm counting that as my standing ovation. It's always awesome to be in Texas, and as you can tell, those of you who have no idea who I am and could care less who I am, that's fine. I have so many great friends here in Texas that I've developed over the years. It really is like kind of coming home, and I just feel so awesome when I get to hang out with people, and yeah, so I have nothing but fondness for this state and all the people that I've been able to meet over the time. So that's great. So let me introduce, this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this idea of building social capital at school. We'll kind of get to that in a second. To begin with, let me introduce my colleague, Steve. So Steve is also known as Teach42. You can find his website, you can find him on Twitter, everywhere else. And Steve and I actually got to know each other many years ago online through interaction. And when Steve's not doing this, working for Discovery, you might find him in a Star Wars outfit. He has this a love and affection for Star Wars. He actually owns an outfit, not that one, where he and his son, Aiden is 6'5"? They actually go and do charity work dressed up as in Star Wars gear, and do the whole autographs and things. It's a really kind of a neat thing.
And this is Dean Shareski, and to be honest, he's at Shareski online. Shareski.ca is his blog, and we are just thrilled that he happens to be wearing pants today. More than not, that's the kinds of things he's sharing about is golf and whether it's a pants or pants
right.
Kind of thing.
All right, so now somebody actually did the work of allowing to make this a bit more of an interactive presentation. So if you go to shareski.ca/y/bingo, you'll have your own bingo card. And I have no guarantee whether any of those words, and when Steve was looking at that, he was a little worried about some of the words that were on there because he wasn't sure what the context of it was. So don't be too alarmed. Everything will be PG, not a problem. And I have no guarantee that we're going to actually do any of those, but if you just want to play along at home, you can. All right. So that's the start of the just sort of fun, loosen up style. We do want to really actually spend some time with you this afternoon talking about stuff that both Steve and I are very much interested in and explore and are really part of our daily work with Discovery. And for me, particularly, has been something I've been working with even in my role in school districts. And it's this idea of social capital. So we want to look at a few questions that we hope to kind of just explore with you this afternoon. What do we mean? Why does it matter? Is it something that's even worth your time? And what are the ways we can build it? And knowing that all of you have similar roles, but that may not be something that you've thought of in the radar or in the realm of what you do on a daily basis. And so we hope to prompt you this afternoon to think about what your role might be and why this is even an issue. And it maybe is a term that you're not 100% familiar with. It's a little bit of a new term, relatively new. Let me just give you a kind of a brief history of social capital. So it's actually a term that originated first in about the early part of the 20th century. Interestingly enough, here's a couple of sort of definitions of it. It talks about it being the social cohesion, personal investment in community. This is actually right from the Wikipedia article on social capital. And I like this, that it tends to share the core idea that social networks have value. And when you take the context of that specific quote, was from about the 1920s or 30s. This had nothing to do with technology at the time, but the notion that social networks have value is not particularly a new idea. And we want to really kind of bring that to the fore this afternoon as well, that this isn't completely new. And I think most of us get that, but I think it's important to revisit kind of where we are with this one. And they talk about social capital being anything that facilitates individual or collective action generated by networks of relationship, reciprocity, trust, and social norms. And so we'll kind of look at that in more depth. I really kind of got interested in this whole idea of social capital after reading this book. It's actually a book written in 2000 by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone. And the title represents the fact that there are as many people bowling today as there ever were, but there are fewer leagues. People are bowling alone. Whereas when bowling sort of first became a pretty popular sport, it was all done in leagues. And now people bowl, they just do it alone. And looking at kind of why that is. Why do people bowl alone? What's happened to our society that we've moved from less of an emphasis on community, and perhaps why we're now kind of marking a return to this notion of community, which definitely has been facilitated with technology. So one of the graphs in there just sort of looks at historically the height of social capital and measuring social capital by things like civic participation, involvement in community groups, church groups, schools, that kind of thing. And you see we hit our peak here around the late 50s, early 60s. And if you think about what happened after World War II, when the nation sort of had to rebuild itself, and there was a real sort of hope, and economically things were kind of moving forward, but also a sense of, hey, we've got to work together to get things going, and so a lot of that happened. And the decline, he talks about happening obviously for a lot of different reasons why we've had a decline, but it's been sort of our own development of technologies and so forth that have made us feel more self-sufficient. And there's the idea that we can actually do a lot of stuff ourselves. And from the book, he says, the bonds of our communities have withered. And we are right to fear that this transformation has very real costs. So it's a fascinating book at looking at what happens when community in general declines, and what's the impact on our, there's definitely economic impacts as well. And if you think about some of the things that we have done as a society to sort of do that, when we think even about neighborhoods, the way neighborhoods are actually constructed, there's fewer opportunities even to walk by and visit with your neighbor, because now we've changed some of our architecture to have these, what I call garage houses, which is this giant garage, a tribute to the vehicles we own, and then there happens to be a house in the back. Or these fences. I'm in a relatively new neighborhood, and one of the guys down the street built this huge fence, and I'm curious, like, what is behind that fence? There's no pool, so it wasn't like a regular, you just got this giant fence. But we do that. And that's actually our doormat on my house, so I'm contributing to the... My wife thought that was funny to have a doormat that said, go away. So anyways, we have done some of these things to ourselves, even in the way in which we've constructed our actual neighborhoods. And I was thinking about my own childhood growing up. So I grew in a small town, about 5,000 people, and that circle basically represented the area in which I was free to roam. My mother didn't say to me, tell me where you're going to be after school. The only thing is dinner time is at 6 o'clock. Be home at 6 o'clock. What you do between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock, whatever, go wherever you want. And so I didn't have this sense at that time that there were these boundaries and I had to be worried about where I roamed. And now I think about my own daughter, my youngest daughter is 14, and that's kind of her area of safety, of where she's, so just there's this whole, just a different feel to our communities in the way that it was. But really social capital is, again, I love the definition I shared before about this idea of reciprocity. It's not about, it's about us working together. And I would, again, suggest that technology has been helpful in some respects at returning us to this notion of community. And if you look at some of the stats, of course we have people, we talk about our kids being obsessed with Facebook. But when you think about my daughter and her circle of where, and you know, blame it on bad parenting, I'm whatever, but they look to these spaces to have community. So these are vital places for them to connect with friends. And because that's just a human desire for us to do that. So I think when we think about this, we just have to think about, we're in a different place. And even the way we think about, well, let Steve share a little bit about privacy and just that whole notion.
Oh, I get to share too?
Yeah, it's your turn.
So one of the things that I've seen a lot, my son is 6 years old, he's just gone into kindergarten, and like a lot of schools, they send home this little form that says, if we're going to be putting his work up online, we promise we're only going to do it with his first name or his pseudonym. If we're going to use a photo of him, we're not going to put anything up in terms of a name, and heaven forbid they actually use video of kids, because that doesn't happen at all within the district. And all I keep thinking about is, I share. And that's one of the things that I find to be significant, that I want to share what's happening with my son's life. And not only that, I think the things that he does in school, those are probably going to be a cut above the things that I share from the ordinary things that happen at home. And those are things that I want to be discoverable, that I want to be shareable, I want to be found. And unfortunately, right now, the way the schools are set up, more often than not, we have established a system where we do our very, very best to hide what the kids are doing, to make sure that if they do something great, we don't associate it with their names. We make sure that people aren't allowed. And I think that's been reflective of the way society has been in the past. But that's shifting right now. We're shifting from a society that has really kept very tight reins on its sense of privacy to a society that's starting to really embrace its sense of publicity, that's trying to actively share. I'm sure a lot of you here in the room probably have a Facebook account, have a Twitter account, have a Flickr or Picasa or Instagram or YouTube account where you're sharing the significant things that are happening in your own life, and often that involves our kids as well. But schools are having trouble making that shift to reflect that same sort of sense of publicity. And I think that's where we need to start moving to. I think we've just got to start recognizing that the tone in society right now is moving, that it is evolving, and trying to make sure that what we do is actually in line with the values of the parents that are in our community.
And it's not just, this notion of publicity is really interesting because we see this shift, and we'll talk about this in more detail, but it's not just about using it to tell everybody how great you are. This is an actual sign in a local restaurant. I thought it was actually interesting, right? I mean, that's not really what social capital is about by letting people know, how awesome you are. It's more than that. But I mean, so we see those examples and we say, well, that's kind of not what we want, and that isn't really the greatest examples. And again, this is Steve and I's world right here. So Steve, this is something that Steve sort of initiated a number of years ago. And
yeah, well, I mean, our teacher community at Discovery Education, it's funny because we're constantly revising and reviewing and trying to figure out what exactly it means to be a Discovery educator. And one of the heart and soul of it is that if somebody wants to be one, we're welcoming to everybody, but you have to do, quote unquote, 2 events per year, which means getting together and sharing digital media, digital learning, your ideas, what you've learned, and so on with other people. Now, here's what I think is kind of the interesting part of it. We've gone back and forth again and again. Does it need to revolve around Discovery Education? Does the sharing that they're going to be reporting in, does the event, does that need to revolve around us and our content? And what we've established is no, it doesn't. Because it doesn't necessarily need to revolve around us. It revolves around what they're passionate about, what they're into, what they find interesting, and a digital learner, a digital educator, in the long run is good for everybody, it's good for education, it hits to the heart and soul of what we want to accomplish at Discovery Education. We don't want to make it all about us. We just want to provide an avenue where people can connect to us, and I think this is something that applies back to schools as well. Instead of trying to make our site the center of the universe and let everybody revolve around us, instead of trying to drive all the traffic to the district website or to one specific location, instead we're trying to colonize wherever they happen to be. If someone happens to be on Facebook, we want to make sure we've got presence, a way for them to identify and connect with us, even if it's just a loose tie. If it's on Twitter, fine. If it's on YouTube, fine. If it's on Pinterest, fine. People ask us, why on earth is Discovery Ed actually on Pinterest? You know why? Because there's other educators that are. And we want to make sure we've got that opportunity for people to connect. Not everybody in your own school districts are going to be on Pinterest, but some of them are. So why not give them that opportunity to make that sort of connection with you? Wherever they are, you want to have the opportunity for them to self-identify, for them to make that sort of loose connection. And if there is a group of people that may be trying to work out this sort of, if somebody's trying to build up their own learning network, we don't know necessarily where they are. We want to be able to facilitate, or who they are, we want to be able to facilitate those kinds of connections.
So we think of these online spaces really as glue that helps keep our community together. And as Steve mentioned, they're everywhere. And we can be in those spaces, and we can take advantage of those spaces to help bring our communities together. And I love and again, part of where people are critical sometimes of these social spaces is because it looks like there's nothing really important happening there. And I love what Howard Reinbold says about this. He says that idle chatter can be the social glue from which networks of trust, norms of reciprocity, and potential social capital can emerge. That is a significant statement that I think we overlook. I mean, think about the conversations that you have had with colleagues today. They haven't all been, hey, let's talk about drive ad implementation. Hey, let's talk about this policy and that. Those conversations are important, and it represents sort of the meat and potatoes of why we're here. But it happens, you get those good conversations because you build social glue with them. Through that, we call it social grooming if you want, finding out what's happening with their kids, finding out what's happening with their in their sports program, whatever it is. So we need to sort of not ignore that side of things. So we want to share with you 5 principles that you can take away with you, and maybe 18 ideas. And we're going to go through these really, really quickly. And I guess your job here is not to necessarily say, well, we're going to do all these things. Not even a chance. But what I'm hoping is either there's an idea or a concept, a principle, if you will, that you would then be interested in taking back to your colleagues and saying, let's talk about this some more. Let's think about how this could work. And is there value? Is there importance for us? So I hope we sort of set the stage for the importance of it. You may still be questioning that, that's fine, but let's get in with some specific ideas. So the first principle I want to think about when it comes to the story of your school, your district, whatever context you want to take, is that your story is being told with or without you. And I think this is really important. You can't ignore the fact that just because it's not happening overtly, people are talking about you. They are. They always have been, they always will be. Whether it's done in a sort of a one-to-one situation or broadcast, there's all kinds of ways. And here's an example sort of where this sort of became very real to me. So about 3 years ago in our district when I was there, an alleged bullying incident took place. And here's what happened. It was Friday afternoon, and the school bus was coming home, and there was a 5-year-old on the bus. Now the 5-year-old was also, just to add a little spice to the story, had lost a leg. She was amputee, and had the prosthetic leg. Anyways, the parent phones the superintendent and says, my kid was bullied on the bus. Superintendent says, boy, that's awful. It's Friday. Can you give me the weekend to try to investigate what happened? I will get back to you on Monday. He said yes, and then he picked up the phone and called the newspaper. So now you know what happened. So this is how this, and you know how that story is going to play out, right? When the newspaper hears that a 5-year-old was bullied on the bus, they're going to go crazy. So that happened. Then the other students who happened to be on the bus actually got involved and said, you got this story wrong, that's not what happened. And so you see the whole thing. And it went, there were blogs that picked this story up, and it just was this PR nightmare of how do you deal with this. So they're talking about you. Now you can ignore it, and again, all the challenge of confidentiality makes that a very, very difficult story to interact with. But what we did decide to do was post it on our district website, front and center, not releasing any names, and saying, look, basically saying, we don't want bullying to happen either, but we have to do due diligence in finding out what happened. So we don't know the details of it yet. We are going to deal with it and make sure that we take the proper action, which can be kind of a pretty politically couched statement. However, here's what we did differently. We left the comments open, and we said, we value your comments as long as you're not malicious. If you want to engage in a discussion about this, we're happy. And so we did get several comments of people, and people saying, you guys got to bear down, this can't happen. That's fine, people can have that voice. But recognizing the fact that the conversations were going to be happening anyways, why wouldn't we want to have a little bit of control in that conversation happening in our space? So that was a bit of a bold move. But again, realizing these conversations take place all the time. There's a report card issue. New report cards come out, and that's always a contentious issue. So these parents in a school district outside of Edmonton, Alberta, didn't feel like the district was listening to them. Their parent had concerns about it, so they started a Facebook group. And the district really didn't know what to do with that, because do we just ignore it? Which, I'm not suggesting that's even a bad move, or do we engage? I just think you have to talk about what you're going to do there. Think about that. And know that that conversation is happening. And to be fair, there was actually some excellent discussions happening about their understanding of the report card. Definitely some misinformation. So there was an opportunity in some way to respond to people's conversations. So I think that's always an important thing. So the first idea, if you will, the simplest idea is if you're not already using something like Google Alerts, do that. So Google Alerts, who's using Google Alerts, by the way? Got a few hands up, about half of you. So here's what you do. You go to google.com/alerts. You sign up, you put your district, your school name in quotation. Anytime your district or whatever search term is mentioned online, you will get notifications saying, hey, someone has posted a story about you. So people do it for themselves. I have one for myself, I have some for my kids, I have some for my district. It's just a simple way to find out who's talking about us. Interesting. So even if you do nothing, but just now are aware of the conversations that are happening in these social spaces, I think that's an important idea.
And I will say, in these kinds of social spaces, people are going to, whether you publicly try and encourage people to connect with you through things like Facebook and Twitter or not, it's still part of your digital identity, and you need to be aware of the sort of the implications of it. And it's never become more real apparent than Facebook graphs that are coming out right now, because people are starting to be able to make these sorts of associations, whether they're directly connected with you or not. The information is getting more and more public. So regardless of how private you keep yourself, regardless whether you're encouraging the public to connect with you or not, your identity is going to still be associated with the school, and you've got to be able to acknowledge that, in a public way. I don't know how many of you played around with the Facebook graphs now, but you can actually do keyword searches and associate them in chains. There's an actual Facebook graph search of mothers of Jews who like bacon. So you can find all the mothers who are feeling awful about the sons who like bacon at this point. There's all sorts of other really interesting little ties. So the question is, when somebody does this search and they say, all right, I want to look for people who are staff at this school who are also into you need to be aware that these kinds of things can come up, and that information may be more public than you actually think.
All right. Well, so that's the first idea is that you got to know that that story is being told with or without you. Be aware of how to kind of connect with those ideas. Second big principle is that transparency trumps gloss, and this is something I think is a real struggle for schools and anybody that sort of has a political bent to their organizations, because you want to be very careful what you say. But we're moving more and more to a time where people are reading through that, and they're saying that's just corporate ease. that's not the kind of conversation. And I think about newsletters sometimes, the way some of our newsletters are written, they don't build trust. They're just information. And that's not necessarily bad. I don't want to make that sound like newsletters are bad. I'm just saying, newsletters don't build trust. They just provide information. So how do we think differently about that? Well, one idea to take away is using Twitter to tweet your story. Here's a principal in an elementary school who's very transparent now about a professional development day that's happening at his school. So he's now sharing stories with his teachers and what they're doing and all kinds of links and using all different hashtags. Just a simple way of saying, here's what we're doing. Live, real-time kind of things. Throws in a picture with that as well. Those are things that build trust. Now, if you are a parent of a child at that school, I have a much clearer sense of what my principal does with those kinds of natural little bits of pieces. And so yeah, even just adding a photo to it makes all the difference in the world with how you're trying to share your story. So I think those are the kinds of things that do definitely help increase transparency. One of my favorite uses of this is Tim Lauer. So Tim is a principal at a K-4 school in Portland, Oregon, who just uses Instagram so well. And I read this quote by Seth Godin, which I think is so telling. We all know this, right? When someone hands you a photo album, the first thing they're going to do is look for their own picture. So if you know this is true, we know this is about humans, how often are we featuring the photo names and needs and wants of our, in this case he's talking about business customers, wherever we can see them. Now again, I know there's privacy issues, and Steve's mentioned that, and we'll talk about that some more. But just think about that. Maybe it doesn't have to be always in those exact public spaces. But how often are we sharing photos of what's happening? So there's a real power to that. And if you look at the story that Tim Lauer's Instagram phone, so he just walks around the school taking photos of things that are happening. And over time, this creates a powerful story of his school and the different activities that he's going on. And I follow this because I have a sense of Tim's school. There's Tim right there on Twin Day. So one kid even wanted to be like him. And I love a photo like that. Isn't that just, I mean, that photo says a lot.
And just in contrast, in a lot of schools, the same sort of thing would be in the newsletter saying, I spent a lot of time this week walking around the classroom. There's great things happening in our school. It doesn't tell you much. Like you're saying, it doesn't make that connection. It doesn't tell the whole story.
Another idea I think is interesting, and I don't see this a lot, but when we think about what our purpose is, showing people that you're being a learner in public. This is Shannon's a principal as well in Canada, who kind of piggybacked off an idea that I was doing around learning in public, and she decided to show her students that she was learning, and she was going to learn the clarinet again, pick it up, and so she posted this stuff online. But it was the point that I'm building trust with my students and parents, demonstrating that I'm a learner and I'm going to show you how. Another example was a principal in a school overseas, in an international school. They all had professional goals, and his professional goal was to learn Mandarin. But rather than doing anything about it, he made himself accountable to his staff and his students, because he said, rather than writing it, he says, I decided to create my own t-shirt. So he created a t-shirt, and he would wear this at assemblies, and kids would ask him, hey, how's the Mandarin coming along? And they would test him around that and challenge him. So it creates this community, because yes, I'm a learner. Yes, I'm the principal of the school, and I'm the lead learner, if you will, and I'm going to model that with each other. Even watching staffs do this. So this is ISD, Northwest ISD, and I think it's just north of Dallas, who uses Twitter to actually, is that you? Have you done this? Look at it.
That's my department.
That's your department. Well, that's awesome. The fact that they are having these open, public conversations about professional learning. Now, they happen to use a Twitter just because it's a simple tool, and I don't know if their intent when they started was, we're going to show other people learning. I'm sure it wasn't, but what a nice byproduct to be able to say to your community, to your parents, to other colleagues, hey, we're engaging in these professional conversations. That's a powerful message to your community that you can show, just using a simple tool like that.
She is right here.
Yeah, get her to
so
tell.
Have you seen any sort of impact out there in the community from this?
Absolutely. The audience grows, every week. They're talking about it at every campus in our district. We're had the local news station come out and do a story about it. It's very powerful, professional.
I had no idea all that stuff. That's a lot of stuff.
Any negatives? Easy enough. We didn't read that, by the way.
Thank you. No, that's fantastic. But this notion of transparency is really difficult in some context, right? So I love this idea about answering hard questions in public. So here's McDonald's. A lot of people have questions about McDonald's. So what they decided to do was let people ask them questions about stuff. And you can imagine if you had an open forum to ask McDonald's about stuff, it might be pretty interesting. So this was one question somebody asked. Why does your food look so different? How do we deal with that? Well, they actually did deal with that.
Hi, I'm Holt, Director of Marketing for McDonald's Canada. And I'm here with a question from Isabel M. from Toronto, Ontario. She asks, why does your food look different in the advertising than what's in the store? It's a great question, Isabel. We get asked that a lot. And if you want to come with me, I'm going to take you across the street. We're going to find out a bit more. Come on. Hello, can I please order a quarter pounder with cheese? Thank you. Thank you so much. Here's my hot and fresh quarter pounder with cheese. Oh, that looks good. Look at this beauty. Put this one back in the box. I'm going to go over to our photo studio and see a little bit more about behind the scenes what happens at a photo shoot. So we're en route now to Watt Photo Studios. Watt has been our agency doing all of our merchandising creative for probably about 7 years. What we're going to do here is we're actually going to put the burger that you saw me just buy. We're going to put it side by side next to a burger that we're actually going to craft from scratch with our food stylist and our photographer. And we're going to compare what's different about the two.
I love it. Food stylist. Who knew? So I'll just skip ahead here. Can I skip ahead? I'll pause it there. So actually they inject that, they've got a whole process. It's a fascinating video. I would really suggest you watch it, and then they talk about how they add the little bits of Photoshop, and they actually leave the blemishes in because they said it makes it more real. So while they could Photoshop all those little imperfections out, they said they definitely leave some of them in. So anyways, that's brave. That's very, very brave that they would do that. So I just love the idea of them challenging themselves to say, we know people are asking these questions, we're going to tackle it head on.
And I think the big key also is to do that in public, to acknowledge that, even if it is a hard question, even if it is a criticism. This just happened a couple weeks ago, kind of similar to what Dean was talking about with the bullying in his school. This just happened a couple weeks ago in my son's district in Illinois. In one of the local newspapers, there was a Monday plotter about different crimes with police and so on. And one of the things they said was bullying at Lincoln Junior High. And it was a bullying incident that they say happened right outside of the junior high. Now, I didn't see this. Most people didn't see this. I got an email from someone saying, that there was a superintendent's response. So I actually first I went to this, and I looked through the comments, and I didn't see anything from the school. All I saw was a lot of people saying, this, and how it's awful about bullying and so on. And so then I went to the district website to try and look for the response. And even on the district website, it was like playing Where's Waldo almost, to try and find what kind of response they'd actually put up. And it turns out in blue, kind of blended together, this notification is in response to a recent post in the Skokie Patch, the article, blah, blah, blah. And then we actually clicked through to it. Then you actually got the whole superintendent's response. The point being, they almost hid it. They basically made it so the only people who are really going to see it are people who happen to hit the district website, who happen to see the blue on blue and be able to find that link, and then happen to muddle through the entire superintendent's response. The place to do that is where the issue is. To actually go over to where the comments, where the conversation is happening, and if you really want people to see it, to actually be letting them know in a much more public way and a much more accessible way. So that's the thing, is even though technically this is in public, it's still, they've almost done their best to hide it. And not only that, this page does not allow comments. So if people do want to explain and elaborate on it and actually converse around it, where are they going to go? Back to the original, back to the misinformation, which is the only place where right now that message and that conversation seems to be happening. So it's something you got to really kind of think about. Where do you want that conversation to be having? Would you rather have a sense of ownership about it and be responding to it appropriately? Oh, and I will also say, so the next point is also moving just beyond the traditional sort of feedback loop, the traditional sort of conversations. You've got new opportunities now to engage your community and let them actually be a part of this school improvement and school communication and so on. And I love these two examples of it. One is from an actual school and one is from a town. This is, oh wow, I can't remember the name of the school. The name of the website is called Holt Innovations. What they did was they took a page from companies like Starbucks, where they say, you know, hey, if you have an idea for Starbucks, a new flavor, or environmental ideas, something along those lines, put it on our community site. People can vote it up, people can vote it down, and the ones that get the most votes, we will actually consider those and maybe put those into, make those a reality. The White House is doing the same sort of thing right now with their surveys and so on. That's why we know they're not making a Death Star, because that got enough signatures and so on. But this is being done at a school. And I love the fact that they did this so that people can actually nominate sort of ideas, things that they'd like to see happening in the school, their own ideas, and then everybody else can kind of vote it up or vote it down. And actually, if it gets enough votes, then at least guarantee that the superintendent or the principal, the administration, or the board will at least consider that idea and give it a public response, just sort of like what McDonald's was doing. Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, I mean, a lot of people might look at that and say, oh yeah, but this will give people a chance to have a negative voice. Absolutely, which again, they're going to have. However, what's the upside? What about giving people an opportunity to say, boy, I feel like I'm part of this because I can actually make a contribution and look at how the school's actually dealing with these issues.
Yeah, and in some sense, this kind of turns the broader community into sort of your R&D department. I don't know if we have this screenshot of the second one, and whether it disappeared, but there's actually a town called Manor Labs, and they did this for a little while. Then the person who was doing this, who headed up the project, wound up leaving and kind of fell apart. But for about a year and a half or 2 years, they allowed anyone in the community to suggest something for their town. And once again, if it got enough votes, they would at least make sure they considered it publicly, and gave a response. And what they found was, this was a town with some around like maybe 1,200, 1,500 people. It was a very small little town, and some of these things were getting like 3,000 votes. What that means is, it wasn't just hitting this community, but people from outside of their community were starting to look at it and say, hey, I've got a suggestion for you guys. And then the people within the community were able to say, hey, I like this way it fits our community, this doesn't fit our community, and so on. But it makes everybody else kind of a part of that process. And at least if nothing else, it gives them a voice. It makes them invested in it. It gives them an opportunity to make a tangible contribution to the school system.
So the next big principle we want to share is to remember your purpose. I love the story, you probably heard it before, at NASA. They really are about that vision. And they said you can go up to the janitor at NASA and say, what is your job here? And he or she will say, to put a man on the moon. That's the job. Even though I'm cleaning floors and doing that. But I think it's about remembering how to use these spaces to focus on the real issues, the real purpose of what it is that you're trying to do. And discovery, again, this is something that we talk about all the time. Our mission, our goal as part of the Discovery Educator Network is connecting educators to their greatest resource, which is each other. And so all of the things that we do, we think about, will that achieve that goal? Is that something that we're able to do? And it's just great to know that everybody talks the same language. And when I was at the district, it really began to make me think about how we use our district webpage. Because almost every district web page that I saw out there was simply a calendar of when the next board meeting was, when the next football game was, when the bake sale, all this stuff. Which, again, I'm not discounting that, but that's what, if I looked at your district web page, and I'll ask you that question, what would I think you're about? And I guess I think we should be about learning. So I took over our district webpage and I said, what we're going to do on the front page of our website is tell stories about learning. And so that's what we did. I said, I want to take over it. So I would collect stories from all the schools, what they were doing. I'd say submit, pulled RSS feeds, did all kinds of things. But the message was, this is a place that's about learning. It's not about meetings, it's not about budget, it's about learning. And there's some really wonderful ideas that I just would encourage more and more districts to take. Here's one of my favorite examples. So this was a school district in Atlanta that started this idea of 180 days of learning. They said, look, we're about learning, we're going to show it. So what they did was they enlisted anybody and everybody to submit things they were learning. So this was students, teachers, administrators, board members, community members would talk about learning. Learn outside school, learning inside school. They wanted that to be that. And if you go to that website, they actually have a whole template of how you can replicate that in your district. And since then, there's a number of districts that have been doing exactly the same thing. So there's all kinds of interesting ways to tweak it. But the message is clear. We are about learning. That's what we're about, and that's what we're going to share. And just wonderful notion of community, bringing it together. Next idea that we want to talk about is that social is significant. We mentioned this before. And I think this is the bypass thing. When people talk about social media, they like the media part. They can't quite get the social part, especially from an organizational side of things. This article written the other day by Dan Pink was telling a story about how he was on the plane and something I can't even remember what had happened. Something terrible had happened. And anyways, the flight attendant just came up to the woman and said, I am so sorry. Which was a wonderful way to respond, other than the ones that you would get in an email or something. We're sorry about the inconvenience. That's not human. And so he was imploring people to say, we need to use these spaces, whether it's an email or whatever, to talk like a human talks, to engage in those kinds of things.
Yeah, and along those same lines, this is, once again, just something I did in my own son's district, because I was just talking to the superintendent about this. They are trying to really kind of turn the community around and try and get the community engaged. They want to be able to find ways that the community can share, and that they can be proud of our school system. So one of the things they did was to create a Did You Know style video of all the great things that are happening in the schools right now. Love the idea. Fantastic idea. And then they filled the entire thing up with this. These are the types of stats that were thrown in there. Which, if you have an idea what EDOM, trans, IMRF, and WC are, then maybe this is meaningful to you. But to the average parent in our community, this is a complete foreign language. And this isn't the kind of thing that they can be excited about, and it's certainly not the kind of thing they would be sharing with their parents, with their friends, with their cousins, and so on and so forth. We need to make sure that, that we're speaking the same language, that we're talking plain, that we're just talking to them, with them, not at them.
So it's always interesting when you see companies kind of get this. So this was a tweet back in May. And that was clever, right? Just a random guy tweets that out. What's funny, and not just funny, what's powerful is that Smart is also on Twitter and said, couldn't have been one bird. It sounds like more than 4.5 million. Seriously, we did the math, which they did. And calculated, it would be more than one bird. But that exchange, I think, is such a powerful representation of, in that case, a business who wants to actually interact with their customers and have conversations. And when you see companies do that, what is your immediate reaction to them? I mean, I'm not saying you're going to go buy a smart car, but you're going to say, that's an interesting way in which they engage with people. And I mean, it's happened over and over, and that's what's a fascinating study is you look at various, and I test the waters of this all the time on Twitter. When I have a customer service issue, and not just about negative complaining, but I'll go and see, will they actually respond to me? And I have a handful of companies that I interact with, that I spend money, that do engage with me. And it's such a different feeling. I'll brag about them. I say, this is the hotel that I go to, or the airline, or the grocery store, whomever, that have this relationship with. So when they understand this is a social space, that changes the very nature of it. And some don't always get it.
Yeah, and the inverse actually happened to me just the other day. I was having an issue with United, so I tweeted at United, and they didn't respond. You know who did respond? American. So me and American Airlines, the official account, we went back and forth, and I included at United in every single tweet about this, but we went back and forth about how frustrating it is when companies don't respond. When they have a Twitter account, but they're not paying attention to it. Which is ironic, and no, I never did get a response from United at all. Now, the trouble is, this is what happens a lot also in schools. A lot of schools now, they are setting up a Twitter account. They are pushing information out, but they're not doing that key word that Dean said, is engaging the group, engaging the community. These are all different schools, and I've got about 20 screenshots like this of schools that have a ton of followers, they've got a ton of tweets, they are pushing information out all the time. But if you notice, this one right here, they're following 7 people. That's it. Remember, there's only 7 people in their entire community worth following. And if you actually browse through that Twitter account, you will see a lot of posts about what lunch is going to be tomorrow, and not a lot of posts actually responding or engaging the parents, the students, the community members, and so on. There's no organic sort of conversation, and that sends a very strong message too. You know, being there and being in that space and having a message is one thing, but using that sort of tool to actually build community, to actually engage with the community is something very, very different.
So as leaders, thinking about how to engage in conversations, so this is the idea. So this is Chris Lehman, principal of a high school in Philadelphia, a very well-known, well-respected person who sees this as a place to actually engage in conversations, whereas a lot of leaders are tentative. Well, I don't want to go there because I don't want to get involved in some sort of a debate. He regularly debates people in a really civil way, respectful way, saying, I don't know if I agree with you, and engages in that. And I think there's something to be said for leaders to be able to be bold enough to engage in those public kinds of conversations around a lot of different ideas. But Chris also, in this notion of social, shares who he is, so he's not afraid to share himself as a family. So, and again, everybody's comfort level is different. I'm not suggesting everybody needs to go out and share pictures of their kids. But finding out who you are beyond your title, I think is a big deal. If somebody knows you as, whatever, your football allegiances or other things, and again, you know what those boundaries are, what you're comfortable, what you're not comfortable with, but there's something, everybody's got something that they can help connect other people with as well. This is one of my favorite stories with Chris. So Chris tweets this out. He's at a Philadelphia Phillies game a couple years ago. So I said to him, I'll buy either of you, he's with his friend Real Richardson, I said, I'll buy either of you a drink if you can take another photo wearing the hat of the guy behind you. Now, again, completely silly, totally ridiculous, nothing to do with learning or anything at all. But those are the foundations that help build relationships, those kinds of interactions. And I mean, Chris and I are very good friends, and I can talk about that relationship, but it's just that example of being human, using it as social spaces, and interacting with other people as well. Another idea, thinking about this, is just recording your newsletter. So this is moving beyond just simply that text debate, and it makes such a big difference. So here's a colleague of mine who just started doing this recently, and it's nothing fancy, it's nothing flashy. It's an iPhone on his desk with some ideas about what he's going to share. And yes, he's going to give information here about the next upcoming basketball game or whatever it is, or the events that are happening. But there's just something that connects with us on a different level when we can see the person's face. Because there's parents who are never going to come to your school because they're intimidated by it. They're intimidated by the whole thing. But if they get to see you and just make a connection with you on a different level, and how easy is that? It's an iPhone, you press record, and that's it. And he does it, he goes to different parts of the school, does it in the library, and it's almost a way to sort of, as a byproduct, showcase the building that he works in, their activities.
And I will say, it is the number of people that see it. Let's say only 10% of your community interacts on YouTube or follows your YouTube pages. Reaching 10% through 5 minutes worth of work, recording yourself, worth it? Absolutely. I'll be honest, most of the time, I look for these kinds of things on YouTube all the time, and what I found is most administrators that are doing this kind of stuff, they spend more time choosing their background than they do in the actual recording of the message. And for some reason, they all gravitate towards notebooks and libraries. That's kind of interesting. Go look, you'll see.
It's very popular. All right, so the last sort of big principle we'll just sort of wrap up here is really understanding that this is a community thing. So as I mentioned before, I'm sure that none of you, well, I shouldn't say none of you, but I'm sure that a lot of you don't have any kind of this mandate in your job description. Nobody's told you need to be building social capital. However, it shouldn't be any one person's job anyway. So we need to think about how do we leverage these things to actually tell a complete story of who we are. So there's some really fun ways that people are doing it.
Yeah, this is a friend of mine's school out in Illinois, and one of the things they want to do is to kind of humanize and share out the faculty members, and B, they actually are doing a safety initiative. So they decided to unleash the faculty and let them go ahead and make a sort of viral style video. So they created their own little lip dub.
Remember as always, to be respectful, be responsible, and practice safety.
My soul and mind will come off. I hope and hope we will fall. This is not good at all, because this isn't our way. We walk slow on the right, we turn away from the fight. We are always the light, because this is the crossway. Let's get together, make the move better. Follow that forever. Hey, baby, hey,
Anyway, you get the idea. And the point being, this is never going to go viral on YouTube. It's never going to have a million hits or anything like that. But you know what? The parents love it. The students love it. And it highlights every single faculty member in the entire school.
I would also argue that there's a real community building in just amongst the staff themselves and doing something collectively like that. I think every school should do a lip dub. That should be, okay, first day we're doing a lip dub. I mean, I know some people would hate that, but at the same time, it does. It's a fantastic way, a simple way of coming together and creating your own sense of community. And as Steve says, of course, the byproducts for everyone else is powerful. Another simple idea is a book club. And I know that some districts are actually doing this, and they're doing it online, they're doing it face-to-face, but having just a conversation. And as Steve mentioned before, part of our problem is we're always looking for scale and say, well, how many parents are actually going to do that? Well, so what? If 20 parents say, I'd be interested in doing that, that's 20 people who now are going to be engaged in similar conversations. And I think you would recommend this one, Steve.
Yeah, I'm sure some of you have read this, but the one thing I really like about this book in terms of, I think it starts a lot of these great conversations that schools need to be having, and it's relatively reasonable, and it's relatively, like I say like this, but short. So people don't feel like they're going to be committed to an 8-week thing and 400 pages and so on. This is very, very digestible. A lot of people can just read this in an afternoon. So I think this is a good one to, can be a good one to start off with.
And again, I think that the idea is that it starts conversations. It's not always about coming to perfect agreement on everything. And that's something that we've got to be more comfortable with. In this sort of rapid change and all of the things that you're doing, and you know this, I mean, when you engage in any kind of an implementation with technology or anything that costs money, not everybody's going to be jazzed about it as you are. But that's okay. That's okay. You've got to figure out a way to engage in those conversations and at least help maybe start speaking some of the same languages. And part of maybe what something like that could do is at least move that needle forward in the same way.
Oh, so one other idea is a lot of people did anybody attend the conference here yesterday? Just a smattering of people. The beauty of an unconference is that the sessions that the conversations that people are having are the ones that they really need to have. It's a great flattener. It's not just the ones that people thought about and said, I'm comfortable leading this, I'm comfortable presenting this, and so on. A lot of times the conversations are just very, very small conversations that may only involve 2 or 3 people. Well, I love taking that same idea and translating it over to schools. Some schools actually have an innovation day. And what I love about this innovation day was they actually allow the students to say for one day, sort of like the Google 20% sort of idea, you choose what you're going to learn. You choose where your learning is going to go. They were able to devote just at least one day to that. And the stuff that the students wound up doing was absolutely phenomenal. Some of them created a song, some of them created drew up plans for a building. Other people did all sorts of different projects. One person actually created a musical instrument. And the one thing that I really love at the end of this blog post was just simply one of the students said, hey, can we do this again tomorrow? I said, well, tomorrow's Saturday. I said, I'd come back for that. You know what I mean? And the students, all of them started off kind of individual and isolated, so and then people started getting into groups. Pretty phenomenal. Carol Bruce translated that exact same thing. She spent a couple days a week doing an unclassroom sort of idea. But what I really love is students then learn from this, to take control of their own learning, to take control of their environment, to share out. And a student who did an unconference along these lines decided he really loved comic books, and he wanted to do sort of his own, he had his own sort of vision for what a comic book convention should look like, without costumes, without any of that other sort of stuff you see at the San Diego Comic-Cons or Chicago Comic-Cons and so on, and he wanted to just get a little bit more pure. So he started his own comic book convention in Chicago called VertCon. This is done by a 17-year-old who organized it and had 250 people attend this thing. He put it together, he hit the pavement, he went to different comic book stores, and he shared his passion with it. And how are we sort of allowing those kinds of serendipitous things, those beautiful sort of things to happen and celebrating the people who are willing to take that sort of initiative?
So there's all kinds of little fun ways to do. I love this idea of Easter eggs. So these are just little things. These aren't big productions, but just little things you place around almost physically in your school. So Foursquare is kind of a neat idea. So if you're not familiar with Foursquare, it's a location-based thing. You basically, wherever you are, it does a search of where you are, and then you just mark yourself, I'm here. Well, here's a high school in Kansas City, where they set up a Foursquare spot, and anybody can sort of set it up. And you can see already you've got 78 people have got photos of that place, and you've got almost 2,000 people, and this is students, this is staff, whomever, have checked in, and almost over 250 people have participated in it. So again, it took no effort to set this up. And then there's even some conversations that I love. There's a student at the top, I'm 2 seconds away from mayor, and Mr. Turner is ruining everything. So a really simple, playful way in which people take ownership of, this is our space. I want to become the mayor, because that's the term they use on Foursquare, the mayor of this school. Now wouldn't that be great if all your students were anxious to be the mayor? They wanted to be at school that much, they wanted to be the mayor. And so this notion of staff and students sort of going back and forth with this, I think is really fascinating, and takes basically no work to set up and just watch it happen.
And I think that once you start kind of setting up that sort of expectation, the fact that these kinds of things can't happen, there's a lot of magic, there's a lot of tapping into innate curiosity. I love the ideas of QR codes and using them in schools, but in my mind, one of the best ways to do it is just put up the QR code in a very small, subtle place, and don't explain it. Don't let anybody know how to do it. Don't let anybody know exactly what you're doing with it, and let their natural curiosity take over. If you have a BYOD initiative, the students will walk right up to it and snap a photo just to see what it happens to be. If you don't allow cell phones in your schools, the students will come up to it and snap when you're not looking, and then they'll still buy. I mean, it's just a matter of playing with it. How long does it take to create a QR code? Literally seconds. It doesn't take much. So go ahead, create one, put one up just for a day or two, and just kind of see what kind of engagement you want to get. Little tiny Easter eggs, they affect the culture of the school. They set up this kind of environment where people are celebrating curiosity and those kind of fun, teachable moments outside of the curriculum as well. Oh, you want me? One of the other ideas is this. Letting other people take over your communication methods. So Sweden did this, and I absolutely love this idea. They have a Twitter account with, I don't know how many thousands of followers they've got. But what they decided to do is, instead of just having a corporate marketing person tweeting out all the time, they decided to say, we're going to turn this over to our citizens. So anybody who wants to can apply to take over the Sweden account for an entire day. So people would apply, and then it would be that citizen tweeting. Now, sometimes some of the things they said were controversial. Sometimes the things may not necessarily have been the best tourism-oriented sort of things. But at the same time, it was a representation of that community. Well, I love doing that same idea. We've done it with Discovery, where we've allowed people at conferences or at the school, if they've got something that they want to share out, they can take over our accounts for the day. And when we did this at TCEA last year, we had somebody actually take over the account, and they would share out their conference experience the entire day through the Discovery Ed account. It gave them access to an audience of around 60,000 followers versus their normal followers, and it also, once again, increases transparency and helps connect educators. I just think that's a really neat idea. So what would happen if you allowed your students, or a student, or a group of students, to take over your school Twitter account, your school Facebook account, to actually be the ones to send out the Friday newsletter 1 week? You might just be surprised by the kinds of things that they choose to message out.
And we're always cautious of particular students doing inappropriate things. We spend so much of our time focusing on what could go wrong. What happens if something could go right? So here's an example, not of an actual authorized account from a school, but a student started this Twitter account. It's called West High Brothers, and basically what it was is this student decided that it was in response to bullying, was going to create an account that specifically complimented as many students as they could at their high school. And when you look through the things that they say, they're so powerful. They're not just, oh, you're a nice person or whatever. They get specific. You're the toughest person. Your influence can still be felt. You're about the funniest dude ever. And it's just, again, this just happened. Now, if you're part of that high school, you didn't create that account. You certainly want to take advantage of the fact that here's a kid doing awesome things. Why aren't we pointing the rest of our community and saying, look at this. Look at how awesome this is. And that happens. And it's just a change in attitude, the way we think about what's important and what's not. And so this idea of hashtag and it happens a little bit organically, and I thought this was interesting. So this was a hashtag, if you look at EIPS, it's Elk Island Public Schools. And hashtags, if you're not familiar with them, are really interesting technologies in the way that they link ideas together. So this is an actual board member who uses Twitter. This is an actual school that is, of course, broadcasting, all using the same kind of hashtag. This is an Instagram photo that a student took of winning an award, and that was a teacher that posted a video of an event that was happening at the school, all using a common hashtag. So how do you now take the fact that you have all of these people sharing all of these things at your district without knowing that they are connected? They're not doing it intentionally. The district didn't say everybody must use it. It's just happening. And now you can think about how to bring that together. One little idea and this is the last idea we'll share, is something like Paperly, and there's other sites that do this. So this is an actual superintendent in the Vancouver area, takes all of these disparate pieces that are out there and brings it together in one site. And it's very simple to do, but just by culling the internet for that hashtag, and then shares it out as a daily newspaper of here's what's happening. Again, this takes almost no work. In fact, it takes once you set it up, it will automatically create this newsletter, and you can have it automatically tweeted out to everybody. Forever. So these are simple ways in which you can start the process of bringing together all of the fact that people are telling your story. How do I help collate that? And maybe that's a different role for a leader, is help bringing these together.
You know, we always hear, and constantly, we're always talking about how test scores are binding us, we've got to worry about this, we've got to worry about this, we don't have time for this and this and this. But the reality is, those things aren't necessarily going away. And if the test scores themselves aren't telling the entire story of your district and of your community, then the question becomes, how are you telling the other half of it? How are you showing out the things that matter, that are relevant, that your parents want to know about, that demonstrate accountability, demonstrate a commitment to education, doing the best possible job that you can, beyond the test scores, beyond what the news covers? If you aren't telling that story, then who is? So it all ties back to this concept that I read about a few years ago that I really, really love. It's resonated with me, and I talk about it all the time. It's this idea of ambient intimacy. What that means is a series of light touches over time leads to a sense of an almost intimate relationship. You saw a series of photos from Tim Lauer. You may have never met Tim Lauer before, you may know nothing about him, but when you saw 7 or 8 images from him around the school, you've built an image in your mind of who he is and what he's like. You probably think to yourself, well, he's in touch with the school, he's out and about, he's interacting with the teachers, and he's active with the students and so on. You don't know that. For all you know, he's behind his desk 90% of the time with the door closed. But those light touches that he shares out with the community, they build this sense of an idea of who he is. They tell a story, and all it takes is a few light touches on a consistent basis to make people feel like they have a relationship with you, with the school, and with the district.
And I love this quote. This is a New York Times quote, probably about 4 or 5 years old, just talking about this early understanding. This was in the early days of Twitter, and Facebook was only a few years old. And I think it's an important notion. I think it teaches us a lot that if you just look at these in isolation, as Steve said, one of those photos or one of those light touches might just seem like, whatever, throw it away. But you start putting that together over time, and you tell a story. You tell a powerful story. And so, again, we want to encourage you to think about this idea of is this like, we know, I think we can all agree social capital is important. We want people to be not just on our side, but we want to help them. We want to make contributions to them. We want them to make contributions to us. We want them to sense this feeling of community. It is a big deal. It's a really big deal. And we may not have thought of it specifically as that's not my job. It's all of our jobs, I think. And now we have the tools, we have the means and the ways in which we can help build this up. So I guess we want to implore you to think intentionally about how you are building community, how you're not. What could you do? What are you already doing, and how can you try to leverage maybe some of those things that are happening in ways you hadn't thought of, using some of the technologies that we have available, but thinking about the fact that that is an important part of who we are as a learning organization. So thank you very much for your time. You've been wonderful, and have a great rest of the conference.
So thank you again, Dean and Steve, for coming up here.